Hello, this is Mr. Philippek, and this is the first of two videos on cell division. And this one is going to cover the cell cycle. And in eukaryotic organisms, remember those are the organisms that have membrane-bound organelles, cell division occurs in two major stages. The first stage is called mitosis, and what that involves is the division of the nucleus. All right, so a lot of times when we talk about mitosis, people think it's just basically the dividing of the cell. But actually in eukaryotic organisms, because they have organelles and all these other things to worry about, it breaks it up into two stages. And the first one is mitosis. The second one is called cytokinesis. And that's actually where the new cells are formed with the pinching off of the cytoplasm. Because in cytokinesis, we have to divide the cytoplasm. Because at the end of cell division, we want to end up with two cells that are identical, not only in genetic information, but also a number of organelles as well as cytoplasm. Now, in order for information to be passed on from one generation to the next, we need to store this information in our chromosomes. And before cell division can occur, each chromosome has to be copied. That means that when a cell divides and a cell turns into two brand new cells, we need to make sure that each cell has the exact same genetic information. So let's say, for example, this cell I just drew was a skin cell. And today alone, you're going to lose at least 600,000 particles of skin. And, we've talked about this in class, how that becomes dust and all those other great things. But each one of these new skin cells, we call this number 1, this one number 2, each of these cells must contain the same genetic information. And in order for that to happen, each chromosome needs to be copied. And what's great about that is you can point to any cell in your body, any cell at all, and it'll have the exact same copy of DNA. The only cells in your body that do not have the same genetic information would be your sex cells. So for males, that's sperm, and for females, those are eggs. Now, when chromosomes are copied, they develop in what we call sister chromatids. Okay, and so basically, we have one chromosome here, and if I just change the color here, here's another chromosome. Now, both of these chromosomes are completely identical. All right, meaning they contain the same information. And remember that during cell division, during mitosis, each of these chromosomes are going to be shuttled to their own individual cells. So this chromosome may go into that new cell, this chromosome will go off into this new cell, and then that way each new cell has the same copy of DNA. Now, these chromatids, these sister chromatids, are held together by something called a centromere, which is right here. And it's nothing more than a tiny little ball that holds these two chromatids together. And it is very important that these chromatids are together so we ensure that each new cell contains the same number and the same type of chromosomes. And so basically, when the cell divides, these chromatids are going to separate. And at the end result, each new cell gets a chromatid. So basically, what are the main events of a cell cycle? So really what we're looking at here in this slide is what is a cell's life cycle all about? Well, hopefully we can all agree here that cells go through a pretty mundane existence. Basically, they're going to grow, and then they need to divide. Remember, cells, when they grow, have to keep an eye on their surface area to volume ratios. And as a cell grows, its volume increases at a much faster rate. So cells can ill afford to be inefficient as far as moving things in or out. But let's say an organism just wants to grow. Here we have, here's me as a small child, and now here's me in my Optimus Prime right now. And the idea is for me to go from that little toddler to what I am now, my body had to grow. And that means that every cell had to divide. All right, think about it. We all start off as one cell. And today, we're anywhere between 15 to 20 trillion different cells. And so cells are going to grow, and then they have to divide. Now, when we talk about cells dividing, well, what is it that they have to divide? Well, they have to divide their DNA. And that means that each new cell must have an exact same copy of DNA. And the other thing, let me see if you can think about that for a second. What's the other thing that they have to make sure they all have the same part of? I'll give you half a second. That's long enough. All right, now, the idea is they must also have the same amount of organelles. And so when we talk about organelles, we're talking about mitochondria, Golgi. In the case of plants, we're talking about chloroplasts. But basically, cells have to grow, and then they have to divide. And that's pretty much what we're going to study over the next few slides. And so the cell cycle is basically the series of events that cells go through when they grow and divide. And the main one that we talk about here is called interphase. And basically it's a period of growth between cell divisions. And so as the cell starts here, it basically begins to grow and grow and grow and gets ready to divide. And once it gets too big and it needs to divide, all right, then it enters into mitosis and then cytokinesis. And so what we're going to study now are all the different phases of this phase called interphase. All right, so the cell cycle consists of these 4 phases. The first one is called the G1, or the first gap. And as we said earlier, cells basically need to grow. And this is a big period of growth. Proteins are made. The cell just kind of lives out its life. But once the cell gets too big and needs to divide in order for that organism to grow, it's going to enter the S phase. And the first thing that must happen is that DNA must be copied. This ensures that every new cell that's developed has the same exact copy of DNA. All right? Now, the other part of the story is what's going to happen in the G2 phase. And this is where the organelles are copied. And so the organelles must be copied to ensure that if the original cell had 3 mitochondria, that each new cell also has 3 mitochondria. And then the final phase that we've talked about here is the M phase, or what we call mitosis. And remember that cell division happens in 2 phases. One, we divide the nucleus. That's actually what mitosis is. And then the second part is when the cytoplasm is divided. Okay? So again, we have the G1 phase, which is growth. Okay? We have the second phase, which is the S phase, where DNA is copied. The third one is G2, all right, which means the organelles are going to be copied. And then the final one is the M phase, which is basically mitosis. All right. So during the G1 phase, the cells increase in size. And so we go from a tiny little cell to, let's make it large. A large cell. And in this whole time, right, we're going to be making proteins and other organelles and basically just kind of living out its life. So the bigger the cell gets, maybe it needs a few more mitochondria, especially if it's a muscle cell and things like that. So basically in the G1, the cell is going to increase in size. In the S phase, basically chromosomes are replicated, and that's just a fancy word for they're copied. Okay? And when we say that DNA synthesis takes place, really what we're talking about, remember, synthesis means to make. So DNA is just made. And the key part here is that once a cell enters this S phase, 9 times out of 10 it's going to complete the rest of the cell cycle. All right, the second G2 phase, or the G2 phase, basically is when the organelles and anything else required for cell division are produced. So in terms of organelles, maybe it's the mitochondria, the Golgi, any more ribosomes. Okay, basically, after the cell gets itself all ready to go, it is then going to enter the M phase, which we know is mitosis. So far, the cell has gone through growth, so it's grown, and then DNA is copied. All right, and then the next stage here, and it kind of ran out of screen here, the organelles are copied. And so basically what happens at this point is now the cell is ready to divide. It has all the different parts that it needs to make sure that each new cell has the same exact information. And so this final slide, which I really like here, kind of is a great study slide. And I'm actually going to just kind of say this is something that you want to make sure you etch on your consciousness here, because it kind of goes through everything. If you look at the top here, here's cell growth. Okay, so the G1 phase. And that's where the cell, again, will process proteins, make any other organelles it needs. Okay, here we have where DNA is replicated, the S phase. And if you notice that this phase is probably the longest. Human DNA has about 9 billion base pairs. So I want you to think about how long it would take you to copy 9 billion sets of information. Okay, it takes a long time. And in that time, those chromosomes then need to, kind of coil up into chromosomes that are actually visible, and then they kind of move on to this whole preparation for mitosis, which basically is where any new organelles are going to be made and things like that. And once we get to this point right here, there's like a little checkpoint, and the cell kind of stops and reflects, because remember, this whole time we're in this little phase called interphase, and so that includes the G1, the S, and the G2 phase. And so basically, after it grows, it copies its DNA, and then further makes any final preparation for mitosis. It has a little checkpoint here. And once it gets the green light, it'll then enter what we actually call cell division, or mitosis here. Okay, so if you notice, mitosis doesn't actually take that much time as far as the entire life cycle of a cell. It spends most of its time here in interphase. Okay, so again, what we wanted to get out of this is just the basics behind cell cycle. What are the three main things that cells do to go through to get themselves prepared for division? And then in the next video, we're going to talk about the actual stages of mitosis. So that's it for the cell cycle, and thanks for listening.